And once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Los Angeles Birders webinar for tonight. A little bit about Lab. We are an all-volunteer organization. Your membership is our lifeblood. You help support things like this very recording, and we appreciate that. You also help support community science projects. You help support our students. You help support numerous other things that happen in and around Lab. So thank you all very, very much. If you're not a member of Lab, it's real easy. Just go to our website at labirders.org, click on the join button, and you're in. You can also uh, give us a gift. God, I'm at a loss of words tonight. A donation. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to introduce Desi, who will introduce our speaker for tonight. Desi.
Thank you, Ron. We are very pleased to have Tom Stevenson with us tonight. Tom has been birding since he was a young boy under the tutelage of Dr. Arthur Allen of Cornell University. And although Tom's professional life has migrated away from birding, his interest in all things birds has remained very strong to this day. Tom has written many articles for birding journals, including Birding and the Birdwatcher's Digest. He's also made many contributions to Birds of the World, Mammals of the World, The Birds of Madagascar, and the Guide to Birds of Southeast Brazil, and he has written his own book, The Warbler Guide. Tom is an outstanding photographer, and he has been an active participant in the challenging Photo Big Day. In 2014, he and Scott Whittle set the US record for a Photo Big Day, taking photos of 208 species in a 24-hour period. Tom also has an excellent ability to bird by ear and has given many workshops on identification of birds through sound. He developed an app called Bird Genie that helps identify over 150 common vocalizations in the eastern and western US. He's also a keen sound recorder of birdsong and has donated many recordings of little-known Asian species to the Macaulay Library. Currently, Tom leads bird and insect identification field trips in the New York City area, and in non-COVID-19 times, he leads birding tours across the US and Asia, including Bhutan, where he trained Bhutanese to become birding guides. Tom is currently working on 3 more books and 2 apps for Princeton, so hopefully those come soon, and we look forward to those. So without further ado, please welcome Tom Stevenson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Desi. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Last time I saw Desi was younger. Put it that way.
Was he younger or you younger?
Well, I think both of us were.
Okay.
But it was more obvious than him, I hope.
Looks great.
Okay, good. So we got that. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so today we're going to talk, or this evening, late at night here, we're going to talk about bird songs and different ways of learning songs and listening to songs, and maybe some new techniques for memorization that can be used basically for anything you want to memorize. So let's get started here. Let's see if this is going. Hold on one second. Here we go. Okay, so birds sing a wide range of types of songs, like this cardinal that sings songs that are very clear pitch, very like you could whistle them with a wide pitch range. Some birds sing songs that have a much more narrow pitch range and often not as much a distinction between each note and so on. Some birds have a lot of timbral intensity or density, like a red-breasted nuthead. And other birds actually sing songs that have elements of noise in them, and using their other syrinx, which we won't get into tonight, unfortunately, but they actually do clear sounds in the midst of the noise using their second syrinx. That's So I always love that song. Some species sing songs that are basically go on and on forever. They don't really have a formal structure for, at least as far as we know, for the song beginning and end, that sort of thing, like a vireo. And some songs, especially most of the warblers, have songs that have a clear beginning and ending, and they're repeated fairly regularly in the same format, like a yellow-throated warbler. Some birds can be identified by the sequence of songs they sing, like a redstart that sings a three-section song. We'll talk a lot more about this stuff in a minute. And then they alternate that often with a one-section song, which is a great way to tell them from magnolia warblers that only ever sings a three-section song. Some birds have super high frequency songs that some of us can't hear. And one species actually tweets. It's a bird that tweets, which is kind of cool. Some birds have something they want to teach us. And we're always grateful for our teachers. And this is a little known fact about warblers that I found when I was researching the Warbler Guide. About every 3 years, the warblers all get together and they have auditions to make sure that you're still qualifying to be a warbler. And unfortunately, this species blew their audition a few years ago. But I think when you listen to their song, you'll know why. So they got kicked out. No longer a warbler. And some birds, not a warbler, but not a U.S. species, but have some amazingly beautiful, complex songs like this musician wren. I love that song. So, what are we going to cover today? First of all, why are bird vocalizations difficult to learn? Usually, if I'm with people live, I'll ask people how many people have difficulty learning bird songs. And generally speaking, it's a good portion, if not almost all of the attendees. It's much harder for us to learn bird vocalizations than the visual ID points, generally speaking. And then why vocabulary could matter in helping us understand bird songs and become better at learning them. And we'll take a quick look at a lexicon for bird songs that we developed in the Warbler Guide that can be applied to other songs as well. And use how we can use spectrograms and these lexicon of terms to compare similar species and to basically listen more carefully. We'll get into a little bit of that. Then we'll talk about some general memory theory and techniques for memorization, which essentially are the same for no matter what you do. There's been a lot of research into how to memorize things, mostly on the academic side for schools and colleges and med schools and that kind of thing. But the theories and their sort of strategies are all pretty much the same for every way the memory is used. And then we'll talk about some specific ways of using those memory theories to learn bird songs, and with a few examples. Okay. As far as questions go, I'm happy to take questions, throughout the talk, and I'll stop a couple times too and see if people have questions. But it's harder on Zoom because you're kind of not in touch with anybody. But generally speaking, I like to keep it pretty flexible. So don't hesitate to put a question in the chat. Maybe Ron can look at them and let me know if we get a few of them. We can.
Yeah, and if they put a question in the Q&A portion right below us, we'll see a little flag pop up, so we can see that right away.
Oh, use that better than the chat then.
Yeah,
okay, good.
That'd be great.
Sounds good. Okay, so learning bird songs, as I mentioned, it seems to be more difficult than learning visual ID points in general. And I'm going to give you a few ideas of why I think that's the case. suppose your field guide for visually identifying birds was just text. There were no pictures, just sort of descriptions that were, created by the author that may or may not be very accurate, may have a lot of personal sort of language in them. And to give you an example, I'm going to show you a few that I came up with. A very beautiful bird makes me smile every time I see it. So I don't know if anyone can figure out what that bird is. I always like to have people guess, but hard to do on Zoom. That's a Blackburnian warbler. So that's your field guide, field marks for Blackburnian warbler. A very beautiful bird, makes me smile every time I see it. Has a dark side, but can be flamboyant. Clearly a wealthy species, supercilious. I think this is a really easy one. It's a Canada warbler. They have a necklace. It's got that supercilious supercilium and super laurel area. So I think that makes a perfect description for that species. Cocky, self-assured, exhibits punky aloofness. Also, obviously, an ovenbird. So these descriptions are working pretty well for me because I came up with them. But I don't know how many of you have guessed these species without seeing them first, but I'm going to guess not too many. Flighty, irresponsible, but also dashing, at least the males. I wish I could see if anybody is guessing, but that's a redstart, of course, always dashing out as they chase their prey and kind of flighty looking, and but pretty colorful. And scary, slightly scary, probably up to no good. Anybody guess this one? Common yellowthroat, obviously, has a mask, probably a little bit scary looking. So you can see I'm sort of making a crazy point here about how describing things based on your own personal perspective doesn't always work for everybody. What does work is objective terms that we can all sort of agree mean the same thing, and then we can find out ways of applying them to bird song structures and other things, and we'll talk about that very specifically in a minute. And when you have those terms, some of the benefits are they can help you describe what you're seeing or hearing in this case, and then later know what you were trying to say. So if you just write down tweet, 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 and then you go home, you're going to like, what was tweet, tweet, tweet? But if you have more objective terms, then you can actually take notes on what you're hearing. They help you remember that. They help you compare species that are similar, and we'll do a little, show a few examples of that in a minute. In terms of visual stuff, they can guide your eye to see more details. And the same thing with vocalizations. The more you understand about the structure and have terms to see what you're hearing, the better you hear. So I'll just give you a couple examples on the visual side first. Lots of people, when they see this page, have this kind of reaction. I've seen it many times in groups when we run into sparrows or just talking to people about sparrows. They just sort of back away slowly and run to the other side of the field. But if you have precise vocabulary, it can really help you break down what you're seeing in a way that makes it a lot easier to distinguish the different species, and also to sort of focus what you're looking at, so you have sort of a methodology for studying a species in the field. Helps you define and see key ID points and so on. And again, it helps you notate what you're seeing and remember what you're seeing if you have those precise vocabulary words. So, for example, the lures, very important for separating Spizella and different species groups. If you don't know anything about lures and don't know the word and don't know to look for those, then those two birds can look much more similar than they do to someone who says, "Oh, I'm looking at the lures," and they're very different. So that term can be very important. Scapular and mantle patterns, bars versus spots and stripes. So if you're looking for those patterns in those feather groups and the back and so on, upper tail coverts having bars or having spots, stripes at bars and spots at the end of the feathers. You can learn to look for those identifying features. If you're looking at raptors, you can look at how many fingers the raptor has, which is a really great way of separating most of the buteos from broadwing, certainly accipiters from buteos, and falcons from everybody. And this is a page or part of a page from one of the books I'm working on now for Princeton. So vocabulary can really help you see better. That's kind of one of the big takeaways that I'd like to have for this talk. In my experience, it's better to have a few things that you could remember and hopefully take with you and use to help you study or help you expand your knowledge, rather than just show lots of pictures and so on. So that's one of the big takeaways, I think, from this talk. Hopefully will be developing a vocabulary there on your visual side. So if you don't know all the bird parts, definitely worth learning those. And for vocalizations, we'll get into some things that might help. This is true for everything. It's true for art. It's true for music. It's true for whatever you're doing that, you know, has more than just pedestrian value. If you were to drive down the street and see all these different houses, you might go, oh my God, you know, it's sort of overwhelming in a way. But if you study the vocabulary of how these things are structured, then you have a foundation for separating things, for looking at things more specifically, and you can compare the shapes of the windows and the pediments and that sort of thing. Okay, this also applies to vocalizations, but only objective terminology is really useful. As I mentioned earlier, you can't describe a bird as flamboyant or you know, punkish or whatever and have it really mean much. But if you have well-defined terms, then they can really help you see and hear a song more accurately also, and help you document it, just as we mentioned before, comparing species. And they help in memorization as well. So why is it difficult to learn bird songs now? If you take a look at the traditional field guide, which is every field guide basically since the beginning of time, the Golden Guide is a slight exception to that, but the way they treat songs is very similar to a field guide with no pictures and only a subjective vocabulary. All these guys use transliterations. So transliterations are basically an attempt to make vowels and consonants match what you're hearing, but it's very subjective and very difficult. And I'm going to prove that to you now. Unfortunately, if we were in a room together, I would definitely have Frank and Susan sing these songs and see if you can guess what species they are. I'm very sorry that we're not together for that, but I'm just going to.
I'm not.
Oh, you want to sing, Frank?
Yeah, Frank can do that. Thank you.
No,
Frank.
I won't subject anybody to that.
So I'm going to show you, I think it's 20 or 22 different descriptions of songs from 22 different field guides. And I want somebody to tell me how many species I'm showing you and what those different species are. So relatively low pitch, lazy, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to read all these through now because I don't have the voice that Frank would have had if he were singing them. But Burzwee, Cecilzy, Tip Tip. Feel free to sing these to yourself because you're maybe in a room all by yourself, so nobody will care. But here's some more. Series of 5 buzzy lisping notes, second lower in pitch. Somewhat variable, starts with a few twittering notes. That to me sounds an awful lot like any bird song, or could describe almost any bird song. Series of 4 notes, a second lowest in pitch. That's pretty objective. It turns out it's not totally accurate, unfortunately, for this species that particular one is identifying. Z, zoo, Z, D, Z, or Zwee, Zwee, blah, blah, blah. This has one of the most important pieces of information of any of these descriptions. Set up rising, modulated, but sweet. So if anybody can describe and tell me exactly what modulated but sweet zer notes are, I will be forever grateful. And a flourish at close. And just a few more. So, I don't know if anybody put any answers in the questions and answers or chat or anything, but
No, nothing in the chat yet.
So I've only once had anybody identify what this species is. It's actually all one species. So these are the descriptions of the same species from 22 different current field guides. I just copied them right out of the book. And the group that I was talking to then was in Texas, which is kind of a clue because it's a golden cheek warbler, which is a little bit of a low blow for people in LA, but I wasn't expecting anybody to guess this bird. Let me play its song. Now, can you match that to those descriptions? I don't know. I have trouble doing that. And not only that, but remember the or? So this species actually has two very distinct song types. Here's the second one. So that's the golden cheek warbler that was described by all those different transliterations. So to me, it's pretty clear that using those transliterations would not help me learn that bird song or remember it or compare it to anything else. They just really don't work. What does work are, first of all, spectrograms. And I'm curious, more and more people now are using spectrograms or used to seeing them anyway, especially because of Merlin. But spectrograms, the problem with Merlin is the spectrogram is sort of whizzing by and you don't really have a chance to study it very well. But spectrograms can really help focus your eye, just like the vocabulary we talked about with visual ID points. And it helps show you the structure of songs and so on. When I was writing, just a little aside, when I was writing the Warbler Guide, I had spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet with a spectrogram of different song types from each species, and then an analysis of the structure, which we'll talk about in a minute, and the pitch profiles and that sort of thing. And that's what sort of helped me come to this concept of the vocabulary and also some of the other things we'll talk about in a minute. Again, besides the spectrograms, then they can help you see structures and things that then you can apply objective terms to. So this probably sounds a little vague right now, but we're going to get into some specific examples. So I'm assuming most people know what spectrograms are, but basically they are time this way, frequency this way. So this is a low pitch, this is a higher pitch, and this is a sort of a smooth slur right up to the top from the bottom. So it sounds like this. So a cardinal, very clean, no real harmonics that are particularly pronounced. Here is a sound that's much more complex. Obviously, each note has many different. These are called harmonics, which are basically simultaneous pitches, let's just call them. And what's really unusual about this species and is useful for hearing this species is that the loudest sound is not the lowest pitch. Like if you pluck a string, if you remember back to physics, if you pluck a string, the loudest sound is called the fundamental, and that's the lowest frequency. And then dividing the string in half, so in other words, double the octave, will be the first harmonic, and then you go on from there, all of which are a little bit softer. But this species has a super complex. They're not mathematically linked the way that normal string harmonics would be, and that's one of the reasons they sound to our ear very foreign. But it's this species, and that creates a very nasal sound and so on, as you can hear. Spectrograms also help you understand the rhythm of songs. And after studying them, it's sometimes easier to hear what the rhythms are. So let me play it slow speed. And by the way, in the Warbler Guide app, all the Warbler songs can be played back at half speed at the original pitch to help with that study. And of course, there's spectrograms for all of them in there, but that helps me hear it and see it at the same time. And then when I hear it again at full speed, it becomes much easier to hear those different rhythmic patterns and so on. If you study vocalization, then as I keep mentioning, you'll hear it better. I'm gonna prove that now. I'm gonna play a recording, and I want somebody to tell me what the recording is. I don't know if anybody, again, not being there, I don't get a chance to see who's guessing what. But this is a recording that was taken, and here it is, slowed down and clarified a little bit.
The Constitution Center is at the next stop.
So when you heard it slowed down and sort of clarified, did that then help you hear it in its sort of more muddled form? Let me go back just to the first one. And that's exactly the same thing you heard the first time, but after you know what it is.
The Constitution Center is at the next stop.
It becomes much easier to hear better. So that's just sort of a, I don't know, a fancy way of making that point. So in spectrograms, it gives us a chance to really study vocalizations carefully, as I mentioned. Here's a song sparrow. And I wrote an article for Birding Magazine a while back about song sparrow songs. And one male song sparrow can have 6 or 8 different songs. They usually repeat one for a while, then go to the next one or whatever. And the neighbor, you know, a mile away has a different song, a different set of songs, and so on. So what is a song sparrow song? How do you define a song sparrow song when they're all, you know, considerably different? And one of the ways to figure that out is to take a look at the structure of the song and see what makes up that song. Here's this slow. And you can see that at the beginning of this song, for example, you have very clear, you know, not a lot of harmonics or anything, clear pitches with big pitch jumps, very, very short. So ba-da, 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 like that, accelerating. Then you've got a clear slur, like that cardinal. You've got a buzz, that's many, many frequencies at the same time that our ear can't really parse out. Clear, buzz, clear, and then a trill that we can hear as a separate element, as it were, but too fast to count. Let me just play it one more time. Okay, so if we want to sort of figure out what we've just been hearing, we can sort of inventory this, just like I did a second ago. Begins with these short, clear elements with wide pitch jumps. And once we know that structure, it doesn't have to be the same pitches, it doesn't have to be the same number, but it's the same structure of very short, clear elements with wide pitch jumps. At least one trill without a pitch change. Notice this trill doesn't change pitch. It's not like going up and down on frequency. It's all flat like that. And one buzz and a trill and so on. And that's sort of what makes up a song sparrow's song inventory. A similar species is Buick's wren. And I have led groups occasionally in the West, not super often, but I've definitely seen people, heard people, watched people misidentify Buick's wren as song sparrow, and vice versa. So let's take a look at the Buick's wren song and see how it might be different. And we'll use the spectrogram to help us hear that and see that. So the first thing we can see is that these opening notes, which are actually its call note basically, have quite a bit of pitch change, right? You can see the pitch changing here. And also we have a buzz here, also with pitch changing. Now in the song sparrow, there were no pitch changes of any of the buzzes at all. And the beginning, of course, is totally different. So you can see especially with this ending trill, how someone could confuse them. But when you start to listen more carefully, and let me play it slowly here. Hear the pitch changes. So you can hear the pitch change in this buzz very clearly. No song sparrow is ever going to do that. No song sparrow is going to start with this buzzy, with a rising pitch attached to it. So there's two clues that are pretty much diagnostic that this is not a song sparrow, even though overall, if you're not listening to it as carefully as the spectrogram kind of helps you do, you might think they sounded pretty similar. Here, I'll just play it one more time here, slow. Okay, so let me apply this to a couple other species, maybe more relevant out there also. So winter wren versus Pacific wren. And I've definitely read field guides that say, well, you can't really tell the songs apart, use the calls or whatever. But actually the songs are quite different. If we take a look at the songs, we can see that this song on the left here, the winter wren, starts low. It has maybe 3 trills, but that's it. And it ends considerably higher. So there's a basic pitch trajectory of this song from the beginning to the end. Whereas the Pacific wren, all the elements are almost all within the same band of pitch range. So there's no overall pitch trend to this, and there are many, many more of these trills and buzzes. So the songs themselves are actually quite differently structured. Let me play them again here. Okay. You can hear their winter wren trajectory there going higher and higher and higher. And here's the Pacific wren. This is slowed down. So basically, by studying these spectrograms, we can learn to listen for these different subtle differences between the songs and then separate them out in the field. I wrote an article also about how to identify Philadelphia vireo by its song. That was Birding, I think Birding Magazine as well, or yeah, I think that's what it was. This is one of them. And you're probably familiar with that song, and then the other one. Probably don't hear it out there very often, but so why is this important to understand? Well, if you look at Cornell Birds of the World, under Philadelphia vireo, you'll see this quote, which is, despite its abundance and the range and so on, Philadelphia vireo is not well studied. At least one reason is because there are lots of red eyes, but also Philadelphia resembles the red eye in plumage and more strongly in voice. And as a result of this similarity, the Philadelphia vireo's presence in the forest often goes undetected, even by experienced observers. So, I didn't quote these, but I've looked at lots of field guides that say, well, one of them is faster, or one of them is slower, or one of them is higher, or whatever. And none of that actually is accurate if you look at a whole bunch of their songs and spectrograms. But there's something that is very different about the two songs. And I got interested in this because I was giving a talk at McGill up in Canada, and at the end of the talk, and I think this is an example of sort of citizen science that anybody could get involved in, and it's really exciting in lots of ways. At the end of the talk, people were coming up and questions and different things, and then at the end, guy was standing there with this big roll of paper, and he said, "Could I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Okay, sure." And there was a table on the side there, and he said, "Come on over here." And he was a professor from McGill, actually, in neuroscience, I think. And he took his roll of paper and unrolled it, and he had many, 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 many spectrograms of red-eyed vireos in his block over 5 years. And I think there were probably 5 or 8 birds, 5 or 8 territories in the area that he was studying. And he said, I can tell each individual apart, and I can tell if a bird's returning from the prior year just by looking at their spectrograms. And he said each red-eyed vireo has about 19 to 22 different phrase types. And they repeat them in sort of odd. He said, I haven't been able to figure out any reason for the order, but they're sort of randomly repeated. So that got me to thinking, and so I took a look at some spectrograms of Philadelphia vireo, and I'll show you what I found. So this is a red eye. So if you take a look at this spectrogram, it's just sort of a random sample of the song. You can see I've marked the different phrase types with letters. So it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So no repetition there at all. I, and then it goes back to sort of F, J, and it goes back to E, K, L, G. So repeat there, a little bit of a repeat there, and so on. So basically, I forgot how many exact phrases types, or 14, I guess, phrases in this song with a couple repeats. And I'll just play it for you once so you can sort of follow along on the spectrogram. Oops, sorry, I just hit the wrong button there. Okay, I guess I stopped it there. So one of the things that it's difficult in the field guides that say that describe the songs as one faster than the other. They don't describe whether they, by fast, they mean this and this phrase are closer together in one species than in the other, or if they mean that this whole phrase is done in a more compressed time way, so this is faster. So in other words, is it or is it or is it zero being the slow one, or zero? So there's two possible ways that speed could be an element, a factor in this. So anyway, that's another reason why that description is really not very helpful. So let's take a look at Philadelphia vireo song now, using spectrograms, and you'll see immediately that there are actually A, B, C, A, D, E, C, B, D, A, E, C, D, A, B, C. So you can see, first of all, that the inventory of phrase types is much more limited. Basically, there are 5 of them with a slight variation here. And secondly, there are sections of this that are repeated pretty regularly, ABC, ABC, AEC. So there's a lot of repetition in here, and there are many fewer elements. So let me just play it once. You can take a listen to it. Just like that one. Like that. So if you were in the field and you wanted to know if you're listening to a red eye or Philadelphia vireo, all you need to do is learn 1 or maybe 2 of these phrase types, and then listen to how often it's repeated. So let's say I learned a shit one, then I'd listen along and I go, D, D, there it is, D, 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 there it is, D, 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 there it is, D, 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 there it is, and I would know I have a Philadelphia vireo, because no red eye is going to take one phrase like that and repeat it in such an incredibly regular way. They do repeat phrases sometimes, but a couple times at a time, and then they dump it and go on to other phrases. So it was only really with spectrograms that helped me understand what I was hearing, and then once I understood what I was hearing, it was very easy to, apply that to listening in the field. So the overall point being, basically, spectrograms help you hear better, I guess is a good way to put it. So let's go back to our golden cheek warbler. Remember, that has two song types, and here's the first song type. So this sort of caterpillar-like thing is a buzz. It's actually many, many, many frequencies at the same time. And if you slow that down, it sounds like a tropical screech owl. It's actually just a trill. But it's so fast that our ear can't parse them at all. So it's kind of irritating to our ear, actually, in a way, because our ear doesn't like not knowing what it's hearing. So there's a buzz, a buzz, a buzz with a little clear sound, a buzz, and then two clear notes. Okay, like the cardinal, like no harmonics, just basically clear sound. I'll play one more time. Okay, and second song type. So similar thing, right? Buzz, 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 clear at the end. And in fact, this is the only warbler species that has 4 or more medium to long buzzy elements, and then ending on a clear, 1 or 2 clear elements. That's it. That's the formula for golden cheek warbler. Even though their songs are fairly stereotyped, you don't actually have to memorize the songs as long as you know what the structure of it is. And to me, that's much easier to remember and to hear than buzz, 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 or twee, twee, tweezy, or whatever. Much easier to say, 4 to 5 buzzy elements followed by 1 high clear slur. Okay, I can understand what that is. I can remember what that is, and when I'm hearing it, it's much easier to identify the song. Okay, so on to some more vocabulary. I don't know if we should stop. Have there been any questions or anything? Should I stop for questions for a second, or how's everybody doing?
Nothing has popped up yet. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or in the Q&A. Either place, we'll get them. And we can interrupt you when one comes in if you want, Tom.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. It's this doing a Zoom is kind of like speaking into the void, so I could like to stop every once in a while. So again, as we mentioned, only objective terminology is really useful. So the subjective stuff can be helpful to you sometimes, as long as you remember what state of mind you were in when you made it up. But if you have something that you can define very carefully as sort of an axiom of birds, then it can be applied and you'll know what it is the next time you look at it. And again, they help you hear or see a song more accurately. They can work in conjunction with spectrograms. So that's kind of how I came up with a lot of this concept, was by looking at lots of spectrograms and then figuring out how to describe them in a way that was clear and accurate. And they allow you to take notes and aid in memorization. So let's take a look at some of the vocabularies. For warblers, I put them in the book, and they're used in all of the analysis of all the songs and all the comparison songs. One of the things we pioneered in the Warbler Guide was having similar species on the same page visually and similar songs on the same page for each song type, and using spectrograms and this sort of vocabulary to help guide you to what to listen for to separate similar looking or sounding species. So for songs, there are a couple key terms. These terms are fairly arbitrary in a way. I mean, you could, instead of element, you could say note, or you could say whatever. I tried to stay away from musical terminology because the spectrograms are much more accurate than scores, than just 12 notes to an octave, and much more accurate in terms of time also. So thinking of it as music, I thought was probably could be misleading a little bit. So the main terms are the element sections, which is sort of what the song is structured, and the quality of the phrases and the pitch profile of the overall song. So let's just take some samples. So in terms of phrase types are phrases are basically two or more elements that are repeated more than once. So a phrase is a collection of repetitions of elements. And it really does help to listen for this in the field. So a two-element phrase, for example, is like this. So you have two pitches that are repeated, or like that. So that's a two-element phrase. A three-element phrase, like a Wichita, which is a common yellowthroat, or a Carolina wren. So it's doing three things and just repeating them. A one-element phrase is just the same thing over and over again. So no companion elements, as it were. And for song types, we have a one-section song where it just does the same thing over and over again, and two sections. So a section is defined by a change of speed, or a change of pitch, or a change of timbre. That's changed drastically enough to say, yeah, that's something very different. Three sections. So clearly, change in pitch, change in direction of the slur, and so on and so forth. And species with many sections. I don't know if anybody, I usually ask people if they can guess what the species is. And it turns out there's only one warbler species that sings a song with many sections. So every other warbler has a more defined song that we can, sort of usually divides into three or four sections. Let me play this slow here. That's fast. Notice how all the elements in this song are slurs, except for the two at the beginning are sort of chips. Play it one more time. And a lot of field guides describe this song as a sort of a chatter, or of assemblage of chips and so on. But they are not chips. They're very clear notes. And to think of them as chips is probably not helpful, because there are some things that are chips that are different. So, and this is this warbler is a lot like the song sparrow in that different individuals have different songs. So there's one type, same species, different individual, different individual, different individual, different individual. The thing that these songs all have in common is a very similar structure, which is many different sections, like lots of sections. Like this song has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many, lots. There's not much repetition in there all, and all these elements are quite different. The species is Canada warbler, and it's a warbler that confuses a lot of people, but is actually one of the easiest species to identify because of this multitude of sections that no other warbler species has. Okay, so that's structure of sections, and then song qualities. These are the qualities of this overall song, or qualities of the phrases or the elements themselves. So clear is like the cardinal, you could whistle it. Buzzy, like those caterpillars. Complex is actually, excuse me, only a couple warblers have complex elements, and complex is actually a very fast trill, but it's short. So to our ear, it just sort of sounds sort of like a complex sound. Hear that again. And then a trill, which is sort of it's slower than our buzzes up there, so we can tell there are different elements. It sounds like a collection of different articulations, but too fast for us to count. Can't really count that. Trill is not really the right word for that, just because a trill in music is different, but it's something that's been used a lot, so I stuck with it. Okay, and then finally there's a pitch profile, so rising, falling, steady. So steady means the same thing over and over again. It doesn't mean necessarily that each individual phrase is steady, but it means each phrase is the same. And then variable, where you're doing different things. Okay. Once you have been able to define the pitch profiles and the structures of the song and so on, then you can actually use song finders just the way you might use a visual finder. Is the bird yellow? Does it have a black head or whatever? In the Warbler Guide app, you can actually define a bird by different parts of the bird, white wing bars, black on the back, whatever, and it will filter out everything that's not that bird. And you can actually use song in conjunction with visual characteristics. But in this case, we'll just look at the song finder. So here's a song, not one you hear out there very often probably, but the quality of the song is buzzy, right? Buzzy. Pitch profile clearly rising. The structure is just one section. Same thing over and again, just rising. No big changes in that. So now I can go to my finder. I can go, well, let's look at the section of buzzy songs as opposed to partly buzzy songs or trilled songs or whatever. Rising pitch, one section, and there's really only one species that sings with a buzzy rising pitch in one section. There are a few that do 2 or 3 sections, but only one with one section. And that's prairie warbler, of course. Okay, so excuse me. Continuing on here, let me just show you some more specific examples of how spectrogram analysis, along with the vocabulary that helps you remember that analysis, can help separate different species. One of the things that's I didn't describe above, but 2 other words we use are compressed and expanded. Compressed being a very narrow pitch range, expanded being a wide pitch range. So that's another set of criteria you can use, a harmonic content. Pitch profile for the call. So remember the pitch profile for a whole song, rising, falling, whatever. You can also apply that to individual elements or calls, in the case of flight calls and that sort of thing. And element pitch profiles within a song and so on. So some examples. This first song is what we call very expanded pitch range. So in other words, it goes from a fairly low pitch to a fairly high pitch. So its range is above more than 3 kilohertz. And that makes the sound usually sound bright. That's one of the ways people describe something that has a wide expanded pitch range. There it is, slowed down. Okay. And then this other species has a very much narrower pitch range. So the main pitches of this are just right in this central area. And it sounds much duller. It sounds much less varied, much less energetic. So with different ways people describe it. But the best way to describe that, I think, is that the pitch range of the whole song is very, very compressed. Okay. There it is, slowed down. So yellow warbler and yellow rump warbler, those 2 song types. And these are all these examples I'm going to show you are examples of species that I've heard and seen people mistake in the field. So they're relevant to reality. It's not just examples. So the harmonic structure of a song, like this nuthatch versus this nuthatch, very obvious in the spectrogram. One having many more harmonics than the other. Excuse me. I always get choked up when I hear red-breasted nuthatch. I think that's Mary Freeman's favorite bird. And then subtle pitch profiles. So this is something that's really important in the West Coast. And I remember being somewhere, I think I was giving a talk at the San Diego Festival, and I was out birding sort of before I had to go in there, and there was a big flock of yellow rumps, and I was hearing all their call notes, and all of a sudden I heard a call note that was totally different. And your yellow rumps have a very rising call note. The pitch profile of the call is rising, whereas our yellow rumps have a very flat pitch profile, meaning that the pitch sounds like it has very little pitch change in it. So let me play those for you. Hopefully you can hear this. I'm going to crank this up because I think these are a little on the soft side. I don't know how easy it is for you to hear that, but that pitch is rising. And then here's the flat pitch. No pitch change, very little pitch change. Okay, so you can be listening to a bunch of yellow rumps and you hear that flat pitch and you know immediately you've got a myrtle there somewhere in the crowd. Okay, and actually let's stop for the questions now. If there are any questions, I'm going to jump ahead to the memorization section here now.
Yeah, we had one question come in
Okay.
about harmonics, since you just covered that. Yvonne asks if you can explain more about harmonics. I think you said a song can be harmonics, but not by making halves, like as in musical instruments where you go da, you know.
Sorry, say that again. I missed some of that. I was trying to jump ahead and it
Sure. Yvonne says, I think you said a song can have harmonics, but not by halves as a string instrument would have.
Oh, right. Yeah. So yes. So the question is, most of the things that we're used to listening to have mathematically related, integral math related harmonics. Like a sawtooth wave might have the odd harmonics or even harmonics or whatever. Birds make their songs with two different syrinxes, and what can happen with those syrinxes is that a frequency in this syrinx produced by this syrinx can interact with a frequency created in this syrinx that creates the fundamental pitches that are coming out of the syrinx, like the lowest pitches, but then the pitches add and subtract. If you think of sort of sine waves like this, and then another sine wave adding or subtracting to it, creating these non-linear, non-integral harmonics. So that nuthatch, if you take a look at the pitches of the nuthatch, you'll see that they are not integral. By integral, I mean integer related to the fundamental, for example, or to the loudest, especially to the loudest sound. I hope that was helpful. I don't know if I hit the answer on that or not, but
so you have the original pitches with each other, but then you have the harmonics of each pitch conflicting, I guess, with each other.
Well, they modulate each other. So
okay.
It's sort of like a super heterodyne radio where you're modulating one pitch on top of a different frequency. But basically, you can think of it as the sine waves. Like if you think of two sine waves being, this is this sine wave and this is this sine wave. And at every moment in time, this one and this one can add up or subtract to be a different pitch.
Right.
So I think that's kind of one of the ways to think of it. So you're creating two sounds, but then you're creating this sort of the mathematical relationship of those sounds.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, birds are amazing that way. Let me jump ahead here. Just going to go through.
Do you
actually,
want to do some of the other questions now?
Do a little bit more. Is everybody
Tom,
still awake?
Well,
yeah, do you want
everyone's
some of the other questions now, Tom, or do you want to
say again? Sorry.
There's a few more questions. I don't know if you want to treat them now or at the end.
Okay, yeah, I could take them now. Sure.
So one of them is Lance asks, where was the Philadelphia Vireo recorded?
That Philadelphia Vireo. I don't remember. I think I got it from Zeno Canto. Maybe Lance recorded it somewhere. That wouldn't surprise me. I just pulled a bunch off of Zeno and looked at maybe 30 or 40 songs, and I just picked one. But I mean, their nesting range, more of the middle of the U.S. You guys don't get those out there, except as rarities. But yeah, not sure. But I didn't see regional differences. I didn't see any regional differences in those in the structures. I definitely looked at a fairly wide range of the songs. Hopefully that answers.
Great.
Okay, great. We have another question from Yvonne. Can an individual osprey, for instance, be determined by the spectrogram, or red-tailed hawks determine, an individual, bird?
Yeah, very good question. I don't know the answer to that. They probably haven't been studied with that in mind, but that's something. If you live near an area where there are a bunch of different osprey, you could record them and look. We know that in big colonies of birds, like cliff nesting birds, like kittiwakes, or birds in big colonies like penguins and stuff, apparently young can recognize, even though they sound very similar to us, can recognize their parents' call. It's even in a group of 100,000 birds. So there are certainly subtle differences that can be individualized. It wouldn't surprise me, let's just put it that way, that you might be able to. A very simple song like an osprey whistle has much less room for variation, like personalization, I guess you'd say, because there's not a lot of harmonic content, and there are sort of rhythmic changes in it, so there might be a rhythmic change. I could really go far afield here, but some species are much more sensitive to rhythm than they are to pitch. So if you take, if I remember right, a swamp sparrow song, and if you change the rhythm of it, they'll still recognize it. In other words, a male will still go after a song, a speaker playing a song where the rhythm's been messed with, but if you change the pitch, they won't. Whereas other species, if you change the rhythm, they care, but if you change the pitch, they don't, or vice versa, or whatever. I think you got that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. But this is an area that is very, very poorly studied. I mean, there are just so many different things. Just call notes. So a guy, I don't know if it was Marler or one of the other earlier song researchers, did research in chaffinch, and he found, I think it was 29 different call types. Some were done by females in the spring, some were done by males, some were done by both. One of them he figured meant predator above, one meant predator below, one meant I'm ovulating, and the other one meant don't get near me.
That's what my wife does all the time.
Yeah, right. So, this is a very rich area for study. Let's just put it that way. Some species learn songs throughout their whole life, like the mimics, but not just mockingbird and so on. White-eyed vireo is a mimic, so white-eyed vireos are learning, snippets of songs in their environment throughout their whole life. So the females tend to prefer birds that have wider inventories. Other species have one song, like a chipping sparrow. Each male chipping sparrow typically has just one song, and his neighbor has a different song. Structure is similar to trill on one pitch, but different rhythm, different song, with very little variation. That's a whole other talk I could do, but
wow.
But yeah, there's a ton of room for research in that area.
Fascinating. It's all fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could definitely go and record ospreys and see. I mean, you want to also note the behaviors and so on. Were they being threatened? Were they approaching the nest? Were they, whatever that might influence the rhythm of the song or what type of song vocalization they're giving.
Well, we can save there's a few more questions, but we can save them until the
Yeah,
end.
let's save and I'll continue
Sounds
on for a
great.
bit and then we'll stop again. So the phrase structure and the rhythms can be applied to species that here in the East a lot of people confuse, like the robin, for example. So if you take a look at the spectrogram, you can see there are many, many pitch changes within each one of these elements. Up, down, whatever. Very fast, which gives it what some people would call a warbly quality. But I think you could call it a warbly quality, but I think it's better to think of it as many fast pitch changes. And you can see from this that the rhythm of the song is very steady. You could conduct this song. If you were a conductor, you'd feel very happy conducting a robin song. Just slow down. Very, very easy to conduct. Rose-breasted grosbeak, often confused. I see this pretty regularly on walks here in New York. It has some similarities to robin, enough so that people confuse it, but it's actually fairly different. Take a listen here. So it has some pitch changes. It's not like a white-throated sparrow, it's all the same pitch or anything. But you'll notice that the pitch changes are many fewer and slower than these really fast, spiky changes in a robin. And the second thing is, if you try and conduct that, I would try and have Frank conduct this if we were in a group together, but if you try to conduct this, you'd be confused and might hurt yourself. So the difference there is partly in the rhythm and partly in how fast the pitches are. And then we have scarlet tanager, which has a very steady rhythm, but not as expanded a pitch range as the robin. That's kind of important, actually, because sometimes these distant buzzes can kind of thin out and sound clearer. But it does not have the fast pitch changes, and it also has a more compressed pitch range. So this is a much wider pitch range than what we see in the scarlet tanager, which also has buzzy elements. And very steady rhythm, unlike the rose-breasted grosbeak. So that's an application for this analysis in some pretty practical ways here in the East. Here's another difference in two songs, the species that sound pretty similar. So those songs sound pretty similar and definitely confuse people. I've seen people stand in one spot for hours trying to figure out, because these birds sometimes are hard to find during nesting season. But the difference is that this red-eyed vireo, which is the first song, and the second one's Magnolia, is red-eyed vireo regularly intersperses, as I mentioned earlier actually in the talk, a one-section song with a three-section song. So these are three-section songs, right? Very similar pitches, very similar rhythms, but the red-eye will do this in between the three-section song, and that's diagnostic compared to Magnolia. You know immediately that it is not a Magnolia warbler when you hear those one-section songs. And again, they do it very, very regularly, especially on the breeding grounds. But in migration, even you hear it then also. Okay. Something more relevant to the West Coast. Here are two songs. So these songs, a two-section song, right? Second section's lower in pitch, similar structure in that regard. One's an orange crown and one's Wilson's. So what's the difference? The difference is in the orange crown song, all these sections are trills. And if you remember by trill, I meant, sorry. I was trying to hit control and I hit alt instead. Let me go back up here. We're almost done with this section, but I'm giving away all the Here we go. If you take a look at this section and listen to it again, this is too fast to count, too fast to count. This countable, too fast to count. So in the Wilsons, the first section is never a trill, and in the Orange Crown, all sections are always a trill, except on Channel Islands, but who cares? If you're on the Channel Island, you'll be just happy anyway, no matter what. So let me go back. I'll play those again one more time. You can listen to them. So you can't count that, right? So the Wilsons is a little bit, it's fast, but you could certainly sit there and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can definitely tell it's slower than about 10 iterations per second, which is about the threshold for us to being able to count what we're hearing. Okay. So another pretty practical application of analysis here. So 2 songs, they're all clear. They have 3 sections. They sound fairly similar, right? And they get confused here in the field. One's a Magnolia Warbler, which we heard earlier, and one's a Yellow Warbler. So what's the difference in these songs? Well, there's a very clear difference, and that is that the Magnolia Warbler in this second section, so right, this second section only ever has one phrase in it. It never has more than one in all the recordings I've ever seen and listened to and in the field. The Yellow Warbler, first section, second section, third section, always has 2 or more in that second section, sometimes 3 or 4 phrases, but in this case, 2. That's the Magnolia. Okay. And the Yellow. So all you have to do to separate these 2 species that can be very confusing is count, basically. So that's one of the benefits of the objective language and so on, is that you can apply them pretty easily, and it's easy to remember better than that. Raven software is really good for looking at spectrograms. It's free. It's not perfect software, but it's pretty good, and you can take vocalizations from Zeno Canto or other areas. I think Zeno now has spectrograms too, so you can look at spectrograms there. It's important to have spectrograms that don't move and that playhead moves, so you can really study what's going on with the spectrogram. Just a quick plug for the Warbler Guide app. This app, you probably have seen it, or hopefully you've seen it, but you can rotate the bird to match your view, and then you can compare 2 similar species, so you can take a look at them from different angles. And the same is true for the songs in it. So in the Red Start song, this is one of the song types. This is the 3-section song, and here are the similar songs, the songs like the Magnolia we were talking about, and so on. And if you expand it, the text will tell you what to listen for, what the differerences are, and so on. And there's the 1-section song, and different species are similar to that 1-section song, but none of these species, like a bay-breasted, never does a 3-section song. So separating Red Start from bay-breast or black and white is usually quite easy because of that alternation of the 3-section song and a 1-section song. Okay, questions. Let's go back and see if there are any questions, and we'll talk a little bit about memorization.
Okay.
Yeah, there are
Mark,
several questions still. Sure. So Yvonne asks about golden crown sparrows. In late winter, we start hearing young golden crown sparrows singing rudimentary songs. Do they learn certain song elements first more than others, and then eventually string them all together?
That's a great question. So this is also a separate talk, but the way birds learn songs, and there's been a lot of research into this, is that 2 things have to happen. Number 1, the bird has to hear their parents singing. And if they take the bird out of the nest and put it in isolation, the bird can never sing. It'll just sound like weird buzzes and squeaks and whatever. I actually have recordings of birds that were isolated. So the first part of the song learning is they have to hear their parents sing. So why does a prairie warbler learn a prairie warbler song when there's also a blue-winged warbler, a field sparrow, a towhee, whatever, all around them? And there does appear to be some kind of template in the brain of the bird that recognizes its song. It's not a powerful enough template so that it can sing that song. In other words, you can't learn from its template, but the template gives it a way of recognizing what to study and what to learn. And in fact, they've done studies where they take a bird out of the nest and play it some other species song. Occasionally, a bird can learn another species song, and I've heard of that in the field, but very rarely. And generally speaking, they don't pick up that song at all. The second part of the process, which is kind of what you're referring to, is that at some point after a resting period, and it can be like a couple of weeks or a month or sometimes all winter, the bird then has to sing and match what it's singing to its memory of the parents. And it doesn't get it right at first. So what it's doing is it's kind of like babies babbling. They start to sing, and then they slowly refine what they're singing until it sounds like the real song. So you'll hear that, at least on the East Coast, you hear it very often in white-throated sparrows, in like late winter song sparrows. I did a virtual bird walk the first spring of COVID. There weren't any planes flying because nobody was flying. And so there were no overflights over Prospect Park and not many people in the park. So I went in and I recorded 5 or 6 different walks through the park, recording everything that I was hearing and then showing spectrograms, talking about it. And I had chipping sparrows learning their song, white-throated sparrows, yellow-rumped warbler, house wren, I've forgotten, I think a couple others. Examples of the birds that are doing exactly what you said, which is basically practicing their song, trying to match it to the memory that they have that they learn from their parents, and eventually they get it right. So at least that's the theory. Those are the theories I've read about, and I've experienced that quite a bit in the field. those walks, by the way, are, I can't remember if it was National Audubon or Bird Watchers Digest. One of those. It's up on the site somewhere. I did it for a couple of different groups. They picked it up, but anyway, hopefully that answers the question. I don't know that anyone has studied that there's any preference in the order that they learn the songs. To me, it doesn't sound like they're learning the elements individually. It's like they're kind of messing the whole thing up, and then they're slowly refining the whole thing. But I'm not that familiar with golden crown young birds songs, so
Okay.
might be different with them.
Great. Well, thank you. Great. There's a question from Richard on the YouTube live stream. In Northern California, we don't hear yellow rumps singing. Do you know when yellow rumps begin to sing in coastal Northern California?
That's a question for John Dunn. He can tell you the first date of the first singing in a county, in any county you want, in anywhere in the country. I am not aware of that, but what I will say is that birds singing, so they sing for 2 reasons. They sing to attract a mate, and they sing to defend a territory. So why would a bird even bother singing during migration? Because they're not defending a territory and they're not going to be collecting a mate. And the reason is hormones. So as birds start to come into the springtime, their hormonal levels start to change, and that revs up their singing. And in fact, there have been studies that have shown that if you give female warblers hormones, they'll sing. So female warblers have learned the song. They won't sing it so well because they haven't practiced it, but hormones will stimulate females to sing. And of course, a lot of species, females will sing if they're defending a year-round territory, like a cardinal or a lot of birds in South America, Central America. that have a stable territory, the females also sing. So females can sing, but most of our migrants don't, because the female comes and goes. But in terms of exactly when that happens and why, I guess it depends a little bit on where their territory is and what their hormonal level is as they pass through your area. So,
Interesting. Interesting.
Mhm.
Sorry, Mark. An anonymous attendee asked if there's an update to the Warbler app. It'd be nice to be able to zoom and rotate. And related, I just tried to look for the Warbler app on my Android, and apparently the original Warbler app was written for an older version of Android and not available. Do you know about updates?
yeah, that's a very couple good questions. First of all versions of the Warbler Guide app rotate. So the problem, it could be that you're just now finding it on the right screen, because the developers, I have a love-hate relationship, mostly hate with developers, but the developers have designed it so that there's just a little 3D icon on one of the screens, and when you get to that screen, then you hit that 3D and it'll rotate. So that's true for all the Warbler Guide apps. So you don't need an update for that. I have heard about the problems with Android, and I've sent them to Princeton to see. The problem is that the developer for the Warbler Guide app went out of business. So it's difficult. We have one guy who's doing some upgrades for it, but it's hard to get them to do stuff. There are a couple little issues with it also. That being said, I'm developing now a 3D rotation guide for all U.S. birds. So Princeton's putting a lot of resources into that. So that will probably ultimately be the solution to that for Androids and for everything.
We're looking forward to that. That'd be great.
Me too. Thanks.
Yeah, that would be
It's
fantastic.
a lot of work, but yeah. So and I'm sorry to later Android owners. Some it works on some phones, but not other phones. And I've been pushing Princeton to see if I can get that fixed. A lot of times the developers change things so that apps don't work. Apple's really bad at this, unnecessarily. I mean, the app should still work because we aren't using any new features, or we don't need any new features that might come with an update. But they kind of do it to, I'm not sure exactly why, but
We're getting
make it
lots
really
of comments. We're getting lots.
Oh, sorry, you just muted,
You
Ron.
just muted yourself, Ron.
I'm sorry, we're getting lots of comments that the 3D feature is wonderful. People are really enjoying it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, I think the new app is going to have a lot more features and a lot more comparison features. You're going to be able to rotate a lot more birds at once, and it's got some really cool stuff. But if we can ever get it done, the app development company, who was working really well with us, I interviewed about 5 or 6 companies and to just do the app development side, and they were great, and they were working, and then they got purchased by a big, huge company, and it went to hell in a handbasket. So we're fighting to get this thing done, but it'll be done at some point, hopefully.
Sounds great. If you want, we can save the rest till.
Save the rest of the questions, or keep on going with questions. We still have many more.
Let me keep going here. Get into the memorization section a little bit.
Great.
And then because that way, if people want to leave, they can.
Okay.
They don't miss this part, and then because I know it's getting long here. I have a tendency to talk too much. So, memorizing bird songs. There's a lot of benefits to memorizing bird songs. Some of it is like the best way to find species that you might miss otherwise, like high canopy species like black-burning warbler, cerulean warbler. And certainly when you're traveling to other countries, it's very helpful to learn the vocalizations. It's not particularly hard to do, especially just for U.S. birds. It's a little more difficult when you're traveling to a new area because you don't always know if you're learning the right dialect for that particular spot. But still, it's incredibly useful. And I just guided a group in the Amazon. It was a really cool riverboat tour where we took these little skiffs or whatever into the Varzea forest every day, and 2 or 3 times a day, lots of sloths, snakes, monkeys, lots of birds. And I'd learned about 300 songs for that, most of which were relevant, some weren't, but and then of course there were species I didn't recognize, but yeah, it really is helpful when you're traveling to a new area. So people have trouble memorizing songs. At least from my experience giving these workshops a lot, that seems to be the consensus. And one of the reasons is they try to do it the wrong way. And one way that it does not work is riding around in your car playing a CD. I assume most of the people in this talk know what a CD is, but younger birders maybe not. Desi, do you know what a CD is? And then listening to a bunch of songs, one after the other, each announced by the first name of the species. This is a guaranteed way to not learn bird songs, because if your brain hears the name of the species first and then the song, the brain goes, I don't need to know that. It tells me the name of the species. Why would I learn that? A lot of research showing that to be the case. Trying to memorize lots of things at once. Very, very, very bad idea. This applies to school. This applies to going to lectures. This applies to anything. If you're presented with too many things at once, you're just going to remember a few of them, and those maybe not even well. And then, listen to a bunch of songs before you go into the field isn't going to do it for you unless you already know them. It's kind of a review. Hearing a song in the field, waiting until you get home, and then trying to match it with songs is a really bad idea, because as soon as you hear a couple of songs on your Apple iPod or whatever, then you kind of erases the memory of the song you had in the field. So those are some bad ideas. What else doesn't work? Reading a book and then reading another book. I don't know if any of you have been on long distance flights and you see a movie, then you see another movie, and then you see another movie, and then you're like, wait a minute, what movie did I see? Your brain just doesn't process stuff into long-term memory when it's given a sort of sequential stream of stuff. Going to a lecture, taking notes, and then reading your notes is not a good way to remember things, and I'll explain why in a minute. Meeting someone at a party or something, hearing their name, and then meeting someone else is not a good way of remembering the name of that first person. So those are some things that don't work. So what's the general theory? First of all, this is true, as I mentioned, research all over the board. Imagery is very important. Our brain is sort of evolved to remember things that are colorful, that are multi-sense, that are crazy, basically. So imagery, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. The more imaginative, the better, and the more personal, the better. Visual imagery is very key often, not always, but there's this sort of common thought that, well, I'm a visual learner and he's not a visual learner. It actually turns out that nobody is a particularly visual learner versus other ways of learning. Everybody's pretty much the same, but some people think of themselves one way or the other, but there have been a lot of tests to show that that's not actually the case. Combining sense and combining connections, so connecting a song to something you already know, very important. Crazy combinations. And then the most important part is that once you've tried to remember something and you sort of learn something you want to remember, you need to stop and then actively recall it and test yourself on it very soon after learning. So if you're meeting somebody at a meeting, at a party, and you want to remember their name, after they tell you their name and they walk away, you stop and you recall what their name is, and then you create some image or whatever, if you can, to connect their name to something about them that will help you remember, which we'll cover more in a minute. But this active recall and testing is absolutely the probably number one crucial thing. The second most crucial thing is don't try to learn too much at once. 5 to 7 things, that's it, no more. And that's kind of the way our brain works. There are different techniques like mnemonics, like Holmes, which is for the Great Lakes, sort of the order of the Great Lakes. The story method. The story method, if it wasn't so late, I'd tell you the story that I use for remembering the order of the planets. But basically, you're creating a story from one element to the next element to the next element to the next element. So, for example, Mercury sees it's getting really hot. So he calls his sister Venus, and Venus comes down to, oh, I can see that the Mercury is really rising down there. What's going on? He said, oh, it's super hot. Why don't you go down to Earth and see if the Mars bars are melting down there? And then you go to Earth, and so on and so forth down the line. So you can sort of create the story. That's basically the story method. The journey method, which is sometimes called the palace method, that sort of thing, is you create, you take up something you know well, like your house, or in my case, like say Prospect Park, and you define certain places in that park that you remember in sequence. And then you connect what you're trying to memorize, especially when you're trying to memorize the sequence of a bunch of things, to each spot. So you walk to the fountain, and then you walk to the meadow, and then you walk to the forest. And then, so each one of those spots becomes a sort of juncture point for the memorization process. And that's also the one that's described in that palace method. I don't know why I'm losing my voice. Memory house, same thing. Some good references on learning on memorization techniques. I've read a number of books on this. These 3, to me, were some of the best ones. It was some of the best research and sort of just basically how memorization works in general, and a lot of research. It turns out your ability to memorize things is not really diminished by age, but the speed of memorization is diminished by age, somewhat anyway. So it takes a little more effort or time, but you shouldn't feel that as you get older you're not able to memorize things. And the same goes true for, I know a whole lots of things about physics, so I can't learn bird songs because my brain's full. That also is not true. I don't know about physics, but maybe physics it is. Lance can tell us. So, system for memorizing songs. The first thing is, if you're going to memorize songs, you have to make a decision to do it. This is the stumbling spot for most people. Is I want to learn these songs, I want to learn the songs, but then they don't actually set aside the time to do it. And it doesn't take much time, believe it or not. And you want to start with only 4 or 5 songs. And actually, on the Warbler Guide Facebook page, I'm not a big fan of Facebook, but for instance, set one up for us for the Warbler Guide, so I put some things on it. Somewhere down in the string, I put together 6 different playlists of Warbler songs, 4 or 5 each, that I think are good selections to start with. So if you want to look for that, it's on the Facebook. So you start with only 4 or 5 songs, no more than that. Do not try to remember 10 songs. Do not try to memorize 8 songs, 4 or 5. That's it. And then you can allocate 2, 5. At first, just 5 minutes a day, 2 sessions. And then if you're starting to learn lots of songs, like trying to learn a couple hundred songs for a trip, you need a little longer time to review things that you've already learned. And then the process you use is, first of all, you create images linking the sound and the bird's name. So why do you do that? Because when you hear a sound in the field, you have no context for it. You're just hearing something. And it's not helpful to go, yeah, I know that song. At least our goal is not to say, yeah, I know that song. I have no idea what the species is, but it's something I've heard before. I mean, it could be useful in some cases, but generally we want to know the bird's name. And in order to know that, we have to link the name to something we get from that sound without knowing what the name is. And we'll go into this in detail in a second. And then you got to test yourself using active recall soon and often. And the thing that's amazing about that for me that I kind of discovered over time is that you can test yourself very soon after learning 4 or 5 songs and doing the image and so on. Like literally 2 minutes later, you can test yourself, and it really works to put it in long-term memory. You don't have to wait very long at all, which shortens your time, your session, and it's even more effective, I think, to do it fairly quickly. So I'm going to start with this. So close your eyes. I'm going to make a sound, and I want you to think, sort of picture what image you get from this sound. So what comes to you when you hear this sound? So here's the sound. Hopefully it doesn't get filtered out by the internet, but here you go. Everybody hear that okay? Could you hear that, Ron?
No, I didn't hear it. I think you might have.
Yeah, I think it's noise basically. It's just like white noise
Yeah.
that gets filtered out by the way they compress and digitize the sound. So I'll just tell you, it was white noise, and sort of like a psh sound, and most people get from that a tea kettle, you know, letting off steam, or a heating pipe hissing, or something along those, or snakes sometimes. But the point of that exercise is that when you hear the sound, when you hear the Warbler song, you want to close your eyes and, without any preconception, see what you get from that sound. See what that sound suggests to you. And that may sound very abstract, and it is pretty abstract, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And it's very important, because when you hear the sound without a context in the field, anything that you might have done to learn it, to create a context for it, is not there. So you want to have the raw sound, and what does that mean to me? So let's take an example. Here's example number 1. So we'll do a couple of these, and I'll stop and take some questions because it's getting kind of late. So here's a sound. Close your eyes again. See what image you get from this sound. Oops. Okay, I'll play it again. Okay. So you heard that sound, and what image did you get from it? And pretty often people say it sounds like a squeaky wheel. That comes up a lot. And a few other things have come up, like a pulley or whatever, but we're going to run with a squeaky wheel. So let's say when you hear that sound, it kind of reminds you of a squeaky wheel. So now we need to know what the species is. So the species is a black and white warbler. Okay. This is their song. 1 section song, 2 element phrases, so on and so forth. So now what I have to do is I have to figure out, using one of those memory techniques, how do I connect black and white warbler, the name of that bird, to that sound? And here's how I do it. So you have a bicycle. It's parked out front of your place, and you're sitting having a cup of tea, and the bicycle is broken. It has a broken wheel. And remember, I mentioned the more visual, the more multi-sensual you can get with these images, the better. Your brain responds much better to a tiger roaring than it does to a leaf falling. You want to have as visual and exciting an image as possible. So I got the bike parked up front, and all of a sudden I hear the squeaky wheel. I say, oh no, somebody's stealing my bike. So I run outside, and I see somebody riding away on the bike with the broken wheel, bumping up and down, and they have a black and white striped prison suit on. So they're clearly criminals, and they're stealing my bike. And not only do I, create that image, but I try to see that image. So I try to picture that criminal in their black and white suit driving away on my squeaky wheel bicycle. And that's the connection to the sound that I'm going to get in the field, to the name. So that's kind of the process that we're talking about. And no matter what you want to memorize, having those images really helps. Let me just give you an example. It's not bird songs, but let's say you want to remember where you put your car keys. Let's say you're often misplacing your car keys. Of course, the best thing is to do the same thing with them all the time, and then you'll know where it is. But let's say you don't do that, and you come in the house and you're going to go do some errands, and you put the car keys down on the kitchen table. If you just walk away, then your chances of remembering that are probably not super high. If you put them down and you say to yourself, I just put my car keys on the kitchen table, then you've helped yourself remember that because you've created at least a sonic reinforcement of that. If instead you stop and you picture yourself putting the keys on a loaf of bread, jumping up on the table and jumping up and down on the loaf of bread to keep the keys flat so they don't fall off the table and then jumping back down, then you've created even more connections to that memory that you're trying to make. And the same thing is true for learning bird songs. The clearer the image, the better it is for your memorization process. So in this case, it's a squeaky wheel with the bike being stolen and so on and so forth. Okay. Let's do one more, then we'll stop and see if there are other questions. So what image do you get from this sound? Okay, so I'm closing my eyes here. So I'm getting buzzes, I'm getting rising. So this is a little different than the type of image I got from the bicycle's wheel. It's not a specific thing, it's more to do with the structure of the sound. Remember, studying it with spectrograms can help you hear that structure. So I'm hearing rising, I'm hearing buzzy. So now I want to know, well, what am I trying to remember? Well, it's a prairie warbler. And so I'm thinking, oh, okay, prairie, so rising. So I'm walking up a field that's a prairie, and it's full of buzzing bees, and there are all these yellow flowers with the black stems. So I'm kind of tying this buzzy rising thing into an activity that I take. And then I'm going to create sort of a memory for that by actually picturing the field, picture myself walking up the field, picturing the bees all around, and that sort of rising quality. And that's sort of the way I'm connecting prairie warbler with rising buzzy sound. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see if there are any questions. I could do a couple more examples, but it is getting late, so maybe we'll stop.
That's wonderful, Tom. You've given everyone so much to really dig into. Mark, there's a whole bunch of questions.
There are a whole bunch of questions.
Uh-oh.
So an anonymous person asks, how does all of this work with non-songbirds?
Non-songbirds, like
Yes.
grackles or something like that. You mean?
That's what I'm.
Yeah.
Not my question. that's what I'm guessing.
Vultures are easy. Yeah. So it's really the same process. So the vocabulary that I developed for warblers works for lots of bird songs, but not all of them. So I'm also writing a book for Princeton on bird songs, where I will expand that vocabulary some to include noise, which is not part of a warbler repertoire, to include structures that are different, more like a red-eyed vireo structure or more like a robin structure versus a fixed song. That's why warblers were kind of a good place for me to start, because they have a beginning and an ending, and it's obviously a song, as opposed to other species that might sing. So I would say, if you're talking about the vocabulary in particular, stay tuned, and I'll have a book on that. But in terms of memorization, it's kind of the same. So you want to listen to that song, like if it's a leaf spitter and you hear the cuck cuck cuck, you might think of, if you think of that as cup 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 cup, you might think, okay, these cups are getting lesser in volume and the cups are smaller and stuff is spilling out of them, and that makes for a very bitter experience because the coffee spilling all over the rug. It would be the same process then, but you know, minus some of the structural cues that you could get from a Warbler song. Hopefully that makes sense.
Great. Yes, yes, that makes a lot of sense.
I just came up with that one, but
We have a question from Tiffany on the YouTube live stream. Can a spectrogram differentiate between a red-tailed hawk and a Steller's jay mimicking a red-tailed hawk?
yes, I think so, actually. So I haven't looked at the Stellar jay mimic, but I've definitely looked at blue jay mimics and red tails, and you absolutely can tell them apart. Yep. And
Great.
So another product that I'm working, I have these ideas, and then you got to do them, which is really a pain in the ass. But the folks that did the Sibley app are doing an app with me, which is basically a spectrogram analysis tool for the field, and it will allow you to record something like a Steller's jay, and look at the spectrogram, look at the frequencies, zoom in and out, play it at half speed if you want. It'll actually lower pitches like a cedar waxwing. If you have trouble hearing, it'll lower the pitch without changing the speed, or it'll slow it down without changing the pitch, either way. And you can actually troll with it at a lower pitch too, so you can be listening in the field at a lower pitch if you've lost some of the high frequencies. And that will allow you to do things like take a look at the whit call of a willow flycatcher versus a leaf flycatcher, or mimic sounds like a blue jay and the raptors. I mean, blue jays, you know, at least 3 species of raptors, and yeah, you can tell them apart because their vocal structures and size of the vocal cords are different. So the harmonics and the noise that they create is visually different, and then you can start to hear the difference too.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, great question. Yvonne noticed that Merlin has a lot of trouble, or had a lot of trouble with Sora during the CBC this winter. Is that to do with the song per se, or just the programming of Merlin?
Is this the same Yvonne? Are there many Yvonnes out there?
No, there's one Yvonne who asks a lot of questions. Very good questions.
Thankfully, by the way, we love her questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I do, definitely. So that's a good question. Just to back up a little bit. So I did Bird Genie about 3 years before Merlin came out. And Princeton funded it, but we had some problems with the engineer who was unfortunately programming the algorithm. I do have a patent on analyzing animal vocalizations using a wide range of sort of audio frequency and, you know, spectrogram stuff. Cornell got a big grant from Google, is my understanding, like $2 or $3 million grant, and maybe an engineer or two, to work on Merlin, partly because Google wanted to have that technology. They wanted to know more about AI recognition of things like human speech and stuff. And the way they do it is they don't use the vocalization. They don't use the audio. They use the picture. So they are actually analyzing spectrograms. So one of the things that could happen, is that maybe the Sora call was too low in volume, so that the spectrogram didn't have the cues. Like in winter, they might not be calling so loudly or whatever. So you might be missing some of the visual cues that the spectrogram would reveal that allowed Merlin to identify it. But in general, especially because the inventory of trainable bird songs has gotten so much huger. So they scrape Zeno, they scrape everything, I'm sure. And when I did Bird Genie, we didn't have many examples of things back then, unfortunately. But now Merlin can be pretty good. I mean, it definitely has a lot of false positives, but it's a good tool, especially for backyard birders, people who don't really want to learn the bird songs but want to know what's in their backyard. It's cool for that, and they don't know that they don't have a Bachman's warbler back there. They just think it's really cool they have a Bachman's warbler back there, even though it's a different species. But anyway, so it could be just the way that the recording was made or whatever. Hopefully that's helpful.
Sounds great.
Great. Great. And another question from Yvonne. She thinks she remembers someone giving a talk before mentioning that female songs were different than male songs. Is that true?
I don't know. So I'll say a couple things about that. First of all, as I mentioned, females tend to not sing unless they're running a territory with a male. So males have mate attraction songs. This is at least true for warblers, and I think it's true for a bunch of other species. So a yellow warbler's mate attraction song is the same across the whole U.S. And the reason for that is the female could be coming from anywhere. So the females don't know dialects. They may not know your dialect or whatever. So the Sweet, 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 I'm So Sweet is the mate attraction song for yellow warblers, and you'll hear the same one everywhere. Same thing with chestnut-sided warblers. Please, please, pleased to meet you. That's the same across the country. But you go to one territory, and a particular bird might have 5 or 6 different boundary protection songs. And those become dialects, at least in the case of a lot of warblers, so that the neighbors learn your dialect, and they know who you are, you know who they are, because you're all singing the same dialect. Some other guy comes in singing a different dialect, and they both go after him. So the singing is basically designed to cut down on the fighting. In other words, don't build a wall, just sing. That's a better way of keeping the battles down. So in the case of female singing, if there are multiple boundary protection songs, it's possible the female might be particularly singing one of those rather than other ones, or maybe female have their own version of the boundary protection song. I don't know, but that's basically why a female would sing, is to help protect the territory, I think. As far as I know, but there's probably a ton of research that has not been done on this. So if you want to get a PhD, Yvonne, you could study that, and there's your PhD, just like that.
That'd be very interesting.
Yeah, it is that very interesting. Question from an anonymous person. Could you talk a little bit about examining gull long calls for identifying species and individuals?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have not done much of that yet, but I am in the process of doing that for this other book. And I've kind of put it aside right now because I'm working on this other field guide that I want to get done. But so I don't have an answer on that, but I would definitely look at that, because I assume there probably are. There may be some individual cues in their long calls. I don't know for sure. It depends a little bit on why they're doing those calls, and but it would be worth looking at. And there may be so much variation in them that you're never going to find a pattern. That's possible, but yeah, it's a good question. It was certainly something worth looking at. There's a book called it's up here somewhere.
Tom, your mental connection was not very strong on that one.
Oh, sorry. I was looking up for like a moron. I'm looking for a book that I've got here. There's a book of bird song analysis. It was done by a couple guys from the Netherlands, maybe. It's a European group, and they talk a lot about gull vocalizations. So if you're interested in gull vocalizations, that would be a book to pick up. And I'm trying to remember the name of it now. It's been a while since I've looked at it. It comes with a CD, and they talk a lot about recording birds and some things about variation. And I know they have a bunch of stuff about gulls in there also. The name may come to me, but if not, I can email Mark or Ron.
Okay.
If you're interested,
yes.
tell them to tell me, and I'll figure it out.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Another anonymous question. What are some ways to identify mimids by their own style when mocking, like between California sage and brown thrashers?
Oh, yeah. In other words, species to species rather than individuals. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a very good question. So I actually wrote an article for Birding Magazine many years ago that shows structural differences in how Crystal LeConte's California, how all those major mimids differ. And it's just like the song sparrow example I gave before. You kind of inventory how those songs are made. And if I remember right, it's been a while since I've looked at that, and I haven't been out birding out west lately. So, but for example, one species of thrasher has chips that are embedded in other parts of the call. And then another species have chips, but they're separate from the other parts of the call. And then you have sage thrasher that has a very, very compressed pitch range. So the pitch range of a sage thrasher is very, very, very similar. And so, and LeConte's, I've forgotten now, but it has to do with the variation in the length of the phrases and so on. But you definitely, I mean, what I would recommend if you wanted to do that and you were going to go to Arizona or somewhere and go birding, go to Zeno Canto, download a bunch of the Thrasher songs, put them in Raven, and just take a look at them really carefully. Or wait for my book. But yeah, I mean, it's more fun to do it yourself, honestly. So, and that's why, I mean, you know, there are binoculars coming out that will identify the bird for you and everything. To me, that misses the whole point of birding, which is learning and you know, pushing yourself to expand your senses and so on. And you know, to me, doing that by yourself is way better than even knowing it. You know, because it's the process that sharpens your senses and really expands your range of perceptions.
Absolutely.
Yes. Great. Another question from the live stream. Can woodpecker drumming be analyzed and parsed on spectrograms similar to birdsong? And then can they be identified?
Absolutely. Definitely. And again, that's something that I've looked at a little bit, but I haven't looked at it carefully yet, but I definitely will. So some books say that hairy woodpecker and downy woodpecker's drumming is different. And anecdotally, I kind of think I've heard that in the field a little bit, but I haven't taken the time. But yeah, you can absolutely look at the speeds. You can look at the frequency, like the call of the downy versus the call of the hairy woodpecker. You can kind of see how the hairy woodpecker has a little bit more high frequency intensity that gives it that sharpness. And anything that's like that fast, like
you muted yourself, Tom.
Yeah, Tom, you're muted.
muted me.
Ah, there you go.
There we go.
Okay. So I'll tell you a story that Frank may know something about, which is I was in Bhutan. First time I was in Bhutan before I went over with Frank, and I wanted to find beautiful nuthatch, which is this amazing nuthatch. It's huge. It's like 3/4 the size of a robin. It's really beautiful, and there were no recordings of it that I could find. And finally, somebody that I knew in India sent me a recording of it. It was terrible. It was like noisy, but it was a recording of a beautiful nuthatch. So I went, played it, and bird came in. And he recognized it immediately, and it was fabulous. So the next time I went up on Zeno Canto, and they had a couple beautiful nuthatch recordings. I thought, oh great, I'll get a cleaner recording. So I downloaded one of those, and I took it in the field. I think this might have been the trip that Frank was on, and I played it. And a bird started responding, but it took me a half an hour to get the darn thing in. But it finally came in, and it was a brown-throated tree keeper. And so what the mistake I made is I didn't look at that song. Both of those songs are trills. The beautiful nuthatch does about 12 to 13 per second, and the the brown-throated creeper does about 16 or 17 per second. So if I had actually looked at them in the spectrogram, I would have gone, oh, I know what's wrong with this recording. So it was a misidentified recording. But that applies to woodpecker drumming. It applies to like we were talking about the orange crown warbler and the Wilson's warbler trill speeds. All that stuff is very evident in spectrograms. Definitely.
Great.
Yeah. Colin asks, I remember Nuttall's woodpecker because it sounds like a referee's whistle to me. Is this a good one, or how would you improve on Nuttall's woodpecker?
No, that's great. The most important thing about it is that it's what it means to you.
Mhm.
So I can't improve on your image, no matter how bad that image might be for me, because that's what you're going to get when you hear that sound. That's the important thing, is that detached from everything, you listen to that and go, oh, referee's whistle. The good news is, once you've learned that, once you've gotten that image, like the squeaky wheel or whatever, and then you've sort of made the image and thought about it, and then tested yourself on it. When you hear that sound in the field, you get the image much faster.
Yeah.
So the image kind of reinforces the learning process. Kind of reinforces the imagery, and the more imagery you do, the easier it is to come up with the imagery, I think. Also, so the process kind of builds on itself. But in terms of specific images, what you get is the fact that you get that is perfect, because sometimes it takes people a while to get anything from a sound, and generally speaking, if you're trying to learn bird songs and you don't get anything from it, skip it, go on to the next one, and leave it for later, because later on you'll hear it and you go, oh, that's a referee's whistle or whatever. But so if I'm learning much songs, I'll skip songs occasionally and then come back to them or whatever.
Sure. Sounds great. Tom, it has been a long but highly productive evening. There are so many comments in the chat about what a wonderful webinar this was, and I agree totally. It's always wonderful to have you talking about sounds and all that.
Great. Well, thanks. That was fun to see you guys. I have a warm spot in my heart for LA birders and for the young birders out there, because Frank and Susan, I used to come out and hang out with the young birder. Desi, I knew Desi when he was like, I don't know, 5 years old or something, it seemed to me. But he seems really grown up now. But anyway,
Well, he is.
I'm happy to do it. Good to see you all, and yeah, I hope it's helpful.
Yeah,
Yes,
it was. Thanks, Tom. Really great.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, great presentation, Tom. Learned a ton.
Yes.
And by the way, we can't wait for the new apps to come out.
Exactly.
Yeah, me either. This book is killing me. I mean, I'm working on this stupid thing 24/7 now, and it's like, but it's getting there.
Yeah, sounds great.
Very
Thank
good.
you
Looking forward
again.
to it.
Next March 12th, we have Kimball Garrett here, which will also be very, very, very enlightening, I'm sure. And Tom, this has been a very, very long webinar. We will have recording up, and people will be able to break down exactly what they want. And again, thank you very much. And
Sure.
it's way past midnight. We're sorry.
It's way past your bedtime.
My bedtime is 9 o'clock. So
Yeah, it's past that here.
right, exactly.
A couple time zones over.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyways,
all right, guys, thanks. Good to see you. Good to see you, Desi.
Yep. Thank you.
good night, everyone. Thank you very much. See you all next time.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.